today for this first take. I believe one of our attendees is Steve Levine, who is one of our senior fellows, whose idea was actually to have the first take some time ago. So I want to give that recognition and appreciation to Steve. The first takes are one of our series of community education programs providing rapid response to educate the public in real time on urgent current events that affect our democracy. We're honored to have a huge panel of experts with us today, and it's led by Kristin Vekasi, the inaugural Mansfield Chair of Japanese and Indo-Pacific Affairs. Her work is to focus on trade and investment strategies in changing geopolitical environments and the political risk management of supply chains. Her current research examines how Japan, China, and the U.S. cooperate and compete to manage complex supply chains, focusing on raw materials and industries essential for the transition to green energy. This has been essential to the state of Montana, and actually Dr. Vekasi was instrumental in preparing a recent trade mission led by Governor Gianforte and attended by 42 leaders in Montana in traveling to Korea and Japan. I was honored to be part of that. We're very fortunate to have the Mansfield Center in the state of Montana, giving our communities a special perspective on U.S.-Asia relations. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Vekasi.
Thank you so much, Dina, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm really excited about this event. We have three absolutely outstanding panelists with us today to discuss rare earth elements, U.S.-China trade frictions, and their broader implications, not just for the world and not just for the United States, but even for, of course, third countries, but also, I think, for us here in Montana. My name is Kristin Vekasi, and I do serve as the Mansfield Chair of Japan and Indo-Pacific Affairs here at the University of Montana. Now, just last week, President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping of China met in South Korea, marking at least, perhaps, a temporary easing of tensions in what has been an extended and often volatile trade conflict. Now, one key flashpoint in recent months has been China's restrictions on exports of rare earth elements and related products like magnets. These are materials indispensable to technologies from electric vehicles to missile guidance systems. China controls the bulk of the world's industry-ready supply of rare earths, has for some years now, and these restrictions potentially threatened economies around the world and perhaps still do threaten. Backing up just a little bit, this escalation is part of broader trade frictions that we've been seeing. During Trump's first term, U.S. tariffs, taxes on trade, on Chinese imports rose sharply from pre-2018 levels of about 3% to roughly 20%. China responded in kind, increasing tariffs that had averaged around 8%. The Biden administration largely maintained these measures, did not really change course, and also added new restrictions on high-end semiconductors and materials that are critical in artificial intelligence, research and development, other advanced manufacturing. Now, of course, we know that in the second Trump administration, tariffs again have escalated quite sharply. By April, Chinese tariffs on U.S. exports briefly hit about 150%. U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods reached around 125% before these dropped back after a preliminary deal to about 60% and 32%. So we went way up, a little bit down. At the same time, however, China tightened its controls on rare earths and magnets, especially then again in about a month ago on October 9th. And then after last week's meeting in South Korea, some of these tariffs and export restrictions were lifted for 1 year. So in this detente, tensions have cooled somewhat, but our new normal in U.S.-China economic relations still involves far higher barriers than we had before 2018, when tariffs were in the single digits and export controls were rarely used. And it also includes far higher barriers than even at the start of this year. So today, from our three great panelists, we're going to unpack what this means, how rare earths fit into broader U.S.-China trade and technology relationship, where the trade conflict might go, what this all tells us about the future of economic security, geopolitics, and of course, rare earths, and maybe more broadly, critical minerals. This topic, of course, resonates right here in Montana, where mining, manufacturing, energy are quite central in our economy. New investments in critical minerals and advanced materials could shape Montana's role in national and global supply chains. We have some new investments in some critical mineral, not rare earth yet at least, but critical mineral mines in Montana. And what happens in global trade and resource policy connects directly to opportunities and also real challenges for communities across our state. So today we have our three excellent speakers from the University of Montana community who will take us through different dimensions of this issue. We have Professor Andrew Wilcox, who will begin by framing the discussion around rare earths and critical minerals more broadly. Dexter Tiff Roberts, who will provide an update on the current state of U.S.-China trade frictions and where things may be heading. And Seng Hkum, who will help us think about the environmental and community level impacts of rare earth extraction and how great power competition plays out in third countries. We will have time for discussion and questions, and encourage you to submit your questions throughout the chat. Believe you can do that in the chat function, and we'll bring them into the conversation as we go. So thank you again for being here, and let's get started hearing from our panelists. So turning first to Andrew Wilcox. Andrew is a professor in the Department of Geosciences here at UM. He has expertise in river processes, geomorphology, the water energy nexus, and broadly decarbonized and sustainable energy systems. He spent the 2021-2022 academic year as a fellow at the U.S. Department of State in the Bureau of Energy Resources, where he contributed to efforts to secure diverse, sustainable supply chains for rare earth elements and other clean energy materials. So Andrew, turning to you, what are rare earths? Why are they important? And how did we get into this situation in the first place?
Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks to the Mansfield Center for putting this on, and thanks to all of you for joining. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about what rare earths are, why they're important. I'll talk a little bit about supply chains and about some of our strategies for diversifying those supply chains. So first, I want to emphasize that rare earths are one group of a broader group of critical minerals and materials. That is a category of items with economic importance and supply chain vulnerability. Many of the issues that we talk about today with respect to rare earths are also applicable to those broader critical minerals and materials. So probably a lot of you have not looked at a periodic table since high school chemistry, but it's useful just for defining what we mean by rare earth elements. They're a group of 17 elements consisting of those sitting near the bottom of the periodic table in this row that we refer to as the lanthanides, as well as two others, scandium and yttrium. And they have similar chemical properties, especially with respect to magnetic, luminescent, and electrical properties. We can divide the rare earths into light and heavy rare earth elements. And many of the sort of issues in the news about China's restrictions, China's control on rare earth supply chains are related to the heavy rare earth elements. The rare earths have hard to pronounce and hard to remember names, but we can call out a couple of them that are especially important for some of the applications that we'll talk about in the next slide. So first, neodymium, which is an example of the light rare earth elements, and dysprosium, an example of the heavy rare earth elements, both of which are very important in magnets. I also want to make the point that rare earths is a misnomer. Rare earths are not especially rare. They occur all over the globe in many different countries. The thing is that they are often not found in high concentrations, and they are tricky to separate from their surrounding rock. Okay, so briefly, how we use them. Statistics vary by country, but one of the big main uses is in various types of magnets, roughly a third of our total use of rare earths. And they have this magnetic property that makes them very useful for these magnet applications. So that can be used for a variety of different end uses. but they're very powerful, so we only need small amounts of them in a given magnet. Those appear in anywhere from our cell phones to military systems to electric vehicle motors. In the US, the primary use of rare earths as an end use is in catalysts. So that can include things like catalytic converters. We use them in petroleum refineries and so on. And you can see listed on the slide a number of other sort of end uses of rare earths. They're widespread across the economy. To call out a couple specific areas, first, military. So a typical F-35 fighter jet will use about 420 kilograms of rare earth elements for a variety of reasons, including in the metal alloys, in the missile systems, in the lasers, et cetera. A Virginia-class submarine will use about an order of magnitude more than that. So very important for military applications. Another area that we sometimes hear about that rare earths are important is for various types of renewable and clean energy applications, whether that is in wind turbines to make them more efficient, in electric vehicle motors, although I want to emphasize that rare earth elements are not used in electric vehicle batteries. And they are also used in solar panels to make the conversion of the sun's energy into electricity more efficient. We can think about supply chains for rare earths and other minerals in terms of this upstream, midstream, downstream, and end use perspective. And this one is a graphic that is specific to rare earth magnets that rely on neodymium, where the upstream is the raw material extraction. The midstream is when we start to sort of separate those materials from the rock and turn them into something that we can put into an end use, like making magnets. Now, looking at concentration of those supply chains, currently about 70% of rare earth mining occurs in China. We can see the statistics there for the next two countries after that, the US and Myanmar. But as we go down the supply chain, it becomes more concentrated. China holds about 90% of the midstream for rare earths and nearly all of it for the heavy rare earths. And then in terms of production of magnets, current statistics are about 93% of those are made in China. So there's variable concentration of the supply chain at different parts of it. But as we move to the end use, we have more and more concentration and therefore more and more dependence on China. To talk briefly about the situation in the US, we do have a very large rare earths mine at Mountain Pass in California. For a while, when that opened in the 1960s, it was the largest rare earths mine in the world. It's opened and closed over the years for various environmental and economic reasons. But in the last 10 years or so, the US has tried to implement various types of industrial policy to develop our own supply chains for rare earth elements. Some differences in the details between the Biden and Trump administration, but we can equate both of those to a heightened government involvement in working with private industry to diversify the supply chains. We have some other elements of strategy that I'd be happy to go into later, but I don't want to take too much time from my fellow panelists. So a few take-homes: rare earths are not rare. Mining and processing is needed, but how and in whose backyard? It is not going to be easy to diversify supply chains. And this is just one example of supply chain challenges that we can think about for a broader set of critical minerals. So thanks very much.
Andrew, thank you so much for setting the stage for us there. So next we're going to hear from Tiff Roberts. So Tiff is a writer and a speaker on U.S.-China relations and the Chinese economy. He's a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Global China Hub and founder and publisher of Trade War, a weekly newsletter on Chinese business, which I personally do receive and highly recommend. He previously served as Asia news editor at Bloomberg Business Week and was based in China for over 2 decades. And we are fortunate enough that he does teach Chinese politics here at the university. So Tiff, tell us about how rare earths fit into broader U.S.-China trade frictions. And we'd love to hear your assessment of the outcome of the Trump-Xi meeting and the current state of U.S.-China trade frictions.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Kristin, for that very kind introduction. And thanks to the Mansfield Center for the invitation to participate in holding this very, very timely event. I'd like to focus in, first of all, on the just completed last Thursday meeting between Trump and Xi. It was the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders since 2019, actually, since Trump's first round as president. And that happened, of course, in South Korea, on the sidelines of the APEC meeting there. From the get-go, it was obvious how the White House was going to present the outcome of the meeting, even before they sat down and started having real conversations. Trump referred to Xi Jinping as a great leader of a great country and as a great friend. He smiled a lot and made it very clear that he expected this to be a very, very successful meeting. Now, of course, his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Jameson Greer, the USTR, had been meeting days before with their Chinese counterparts. So, of course, President Trump did have an idea about what was going to be discussed. Nevertheless, it was very clear that he was going to make sure that this would be an amazing meeting, as he said later. And a meeting that he also said ranked a 12 on a scale of 0 to 10, which he said on the plane back to the US to American reporters. Interestingly, on the Chinese side, there was a very, very, very different optics. Xi Jinping rarely smiled during the meeting. While he did talk about the importance of long-term cooperation between the US and China, he moderated that by saying we need that to avoid falling into what he said was a vicious cycle of mutual retaliation, which I'm sure is how the Chinese see the relationship in recent days. So where are we now in the U.S.-China relationship and after this historic meeting last Thursday? First of all, it was not a deal that was decided upon. China's made it very clear that it was a consensus to reach a deal. We heard that most recently earlier today from the Chinese ambassador to the U.S., Xie Feng, called it a consensus. He said now going forward, we need concrete outcomes to go forward. And the Chinese ambassador said to reassure the people of U.S. and China and the people of the world that there actually will be a deal. So no deal yet from China's perspective. What did they agree upon? Well, I would call it overall a temporary truce, a one-year truce between the two countries. What has the White House told us are some of the amazing achievements? One is, of course, the resumption of soybean purchases, which is very, very important, of course, to soybean farmers. It also happens to be important to Trump in the run-up to next year's midterm elections, with soybean farmers typically from pretty reliably red states and a potential voting bloc that the Trump administration does not want to upset. And of course, they had been doing very, very badly with China using soybeans to retaliate against the US tariffs. And then to the topic of today, there was the announcement by China that they would put a one-year hold on plans to radically expand their export controls on rare earths. And this was a critical part of it, not just on rare earths, but on products that contained rare earths. The U.S., for its part, put a one-year halt on something they call the 50% rule they've been talking about imposing, also known as the affiliates rule. This would have been devastating to Chinese companies. It would have meant that the already very large so-called entity list that the U.S. has, which includes about 1,300 Chinese companies that are forbidden from doing most trade with the United States or U.S. companies, that their subsidiaries or their affiliates would also be impacted and also would be banned from doing business in the U.S. That would have taken the number of affected Chinese companies from somewhere like 1,300 to 20,000. So that was something China was very, very concerned about. Other things, U.S. announced it would remove 10% of tariffs on China, which had been imposed earlier this year to punish China for supposedly not cracking down on exports of the precursor elements for fentanyl. And now the White House is telling us China's promised to do that. So hopefully we'll see progress there. And both sides also said they would postpone port fees on each other's ships. Where we stand now, I would say, again, is really a return to the status quo of earlier this year. China will buy soybeans again. Well, that's great. China, this is an agricultural product that China wants and needs. They've done a very good job of diversifying since the first trade administration. I'm sorry, the first Trump administration and the first trade war. So now they buy most of their soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, but they like American soybeans. If the trade relationship were less erratic or volatile, they would be buying a lot of American soybeans. So that's a return to the status quo. And similarly with the rare earths, which is what we're talking about today, I just would like to highlight the fact that although China has said it will put a temporary one-year pause on further expansion of restrictions on rare earths, there is no guarantee whatsoever that China will, in the long term, actually provide the U.S. with a free flow of rare earths. That would be, as I've said in a different venue, a very stupid thing for China to do. China has figured out that rare earths and critical minerals are a very significant point of leverage over the U.S. And they, I would also say, see it as counterbalancing U.S. leverage that Washington has over China on advanced technology and particularly advanced semiconductor chips. China will continue to press the Trump administration to loosen restrictions on advanced semiconductors, and they see very much restrictions on rare earths as their point of leverage, and they would like to do some sort of deal between the two. One last thing I would say, in the days since last Thursday, I mentioned the ambassador comment about the fact that we have a consensus now. He also said today that there are so-called 4 red lines that the U.S. must avoid. Those include Taiwan, human rights and democracy, China's political system, and China's development state. He said if the U.S. continues to criticize China in those 4 areas, that risks our trade deal or the consensus and the eventual successful implementation of a trade deal. Trump also said in an interview, I think on Sunday, released on Sunday, CBS 60 Minutes, that, quote, something along the lines of, if Xi Jinping knows that if they invade Taiwan, what our response will be, apparently trying to suggest that the U.S. would respond in kind and take action against the PLA in a situation like that. So very, very unsettled relationship right now. The one thing we do know is Trump very much wants that eventual big deal. I think it's sort of in his DNA to want deals. And he also very much likes Xi Jinping, as he's told us repeatedly over the years. He admires him. He also admires, by the way, his authoritarian capabilities. He has praised Xi for his iron fist in the past, quote unquote. And Trump is also planning to go to China. He's announced in April of next year. So I imagine we'll see some sort of continued truce in the months before April. Longer term, the jury's out what's going to happen. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tiff. All right, we have one more speaker now. We're turning to Seng Hkum, who is a PhD student in the Natural Resource Conservation Program here at UM. And his research interests are on how global green transition and growing demand for advanced industrial products have had an impact on his home region in Kachin State in northern Burma, which is one of the world's major sources of heavy rare earth elements. His work focuses on how these critical minerals supply China's rare earth industry and shape its role in global trade negotiations. In particular, he is investigating the governance of Kachin's rare earth sector and how Chinese policies influence local extraction and management. So Sung, turning to you, how does great power conflict over trade in rare earths affect third countries like Burma or Myanmar? What are you seeing in your research on Kachin State? And I'm going to go ahead and share your slides, and you tell me when to advance, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kristin. Yes, and yeah, it's a very good question, what you just asked. And many people may wonder how this apparently insignificant, can you please next, more, next, yeah. Yeah, apparently insignificant regions of this Kachin State, the northern Myanmar regions, it's relevant to today's discussion about the global trades and great power competition. And yeah, I'm sure that even you don't know much about Myanmar, but you are likely to hold a piece of it right now in your cell phone or laptop. As Dr. Andrew also mentioned, all of our appliances contain with this starting rare level. So as you can see from this graph, Burma is now the third largest rare producer in the world. And more importantly, despite that China is the largest producer, more than half of its heavy rare earth, especially the heavy rare earth, is come from Burma, particularly dysprosium and the terbium. These two elements come from Burma. What about like 1.4 billion USD? It's in 2023. This means that Burma, Myanmar rare earth is crucial in the global rare earth supply chain, as the rest of the world, including the US, heavily relies on the importing heavy rare earths from China, which means it is indirectly related to the Burmese rare earth. So the current US administration itself is also attempting to diversify this rare earth supply chain and also interested in assessing this rare earth mineral in Myanmar and also in the ASEAN regions. So please next. And before we discuss further, I would like to give a brief overview of Burma so that everyone will have some background about the country. Although many people might not really familiar with Burma, and there's a very interesting historical connection to Montana. Senator Mansfield himself visited to northern Burma during the Second World War as a member of House of Representatives. He visited to American troop station along the Lido Road. That's you see this the road that connected from the India to China to supply these Chinese nationalist troops against the Japanese troops during that time. And he also met, interestingly, he also met with a fellow Montana soldier during this visit. And you will see in this picture on the right corner, that's Senator Mansfield together with the soldier from the Montana. So these people are serving together along with this Kachin Ranger, the 101, you know, the OSS 101 detachment. Those later become the CIA. Lots of these Kachin native and the local people are also part of this campaign. So although the Second World War has actually ending for a long time ago in many parts of the world and almost forget, but the war in Burma is continue going on, with the Kachin, along with many other ethnic groups, continues to struggle for their rights and autonomy against the Burmese military regime. And yeah, next, please. And so on this map, you will see that you can see the different color that on the map that indicate that the territory that controlled by different fictions. So the yellow color that's indicate to the territory that's still controlled by the Burmese military, but the rest of the other different colors are controlled by these various different resistant groups, including the Kachin Independent Army or Kachin Independent Organization, which control most part of the northern Burma, including this rare earth mining region. And especially the most significant thing that happened last year, since last end of this 2024, the Kachin or control all of this rare earth mining region. Before previously, it was controlled by the militia group that affiliated to the Burmese military regime. So as you see, the country is like fragmented and experiencing ongoing violence. Unfortunately, the rare earth mineral also have become deeply entangled in this conflict. Next, please. So China has a large role to play in rare earth mining in Burma. Given its geography and instability, the region has become a target for the exploitation, and China has taken great advantage over it. And all of these rare earth mining projects are directly invested and operated by Chinese firms that are directly linked to the major state firm that control the rest of this rare earth supply chain. Since the Chinese rare earth policy shifted from after the 2010 WTO dispute between the American and the West, and China has strengthened its domestic environmental regulation, focused on the downstream economy. As a result, all these harmful and environmental costly upstream mining activity have been shifted to this other side of the border in Kachin State. So thank you for my part as a initial discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sung. That was a really great introduction to some of the, right. So this is not just a US-China thing. And of course, all countries in the world are largely dependent on these Chinese-centric supply chains. So this is not just United States, this is not just third producing countries, it's also a lot of other countries that are involved. And one of the things that, I have a few follow-up questions for the panelists, and I'll ask people to jump in as well, but I also encourage members of the audience, you can put questions into the Q&A, and I'll start to incorporate those into the conversation as well. And you should be able to see that via Teams, and you should be able to submit questions there. So to start getting into some of these issues a little bit more, one of the bread and butter approaches to this kinds of dependence is diversification, right? So we want to manage risk. You can diversify, you can spread exposure, reduce vulnerability, you can build resilience, you can de-risk, right? These are all the different terms that are used by different administrations and approaches. And yesterday, Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, said to CNN, he says, "I think it was naive to think that the Chinese were not going to roll out these rare earth restrictions. They've been putting their rare earth plan together for 25 to 30 years, and the US has been asleep. But now this administration is going to move at warp speed over the next 1 to 2 years to get us out from under the sword the Chinese have over us, and they have over the whole world. And this time we've rallied the allies, all the Western democracies, the Asian democracies, and India are going to join us in trying to form our own supply chains." And Andrew, I'll turn to you first for this question, but anyone else can jump in. What are the most well, I'd like you to assess that quote, but also think about what are the most realistic pathways for the United States or other countries, the European Union, Japan, Canada, to reduce dependence on Chinese rare earths? You can think about critical minerals more broadly. I could pull up a bunch of comparative data. We're not going to do that. We'll focus on rare earths. But what do you think?
Yeah, sure. I'll touch on a few items that I had as sort of words on one of my previous slides. So one of those is diplomacy. We will not build a individual domestic U.S. supply chain on our own. We will work with countries like Japan, Australia, Malaysia, et cetera. We've been doing that for many years. This is not a new thing that is all of a sudden happening now. But we need to sort of think about this as a sort of, combined global effort. Second, we have to think about whether the best path is to develop an entirely separate supply chain from China, and whether that is even possible, or whether there are elements that we will need to continue trading with China and using some of their final products, such as permanent magnets. So not necessarily trying to develop something entirely new on top of something that China already does quite well. They have decades that have gone into this. There's been government support, there's technical know-how, and they've achieved cost savings. So one reason our uses of rare earths have gone up so much is because prices have gone down, in part due to what China has done, whether that's for rare earths or for other critical minerals. And then I guess another one I'll just briefly mention is innovation. So we will need to find new ways of achieving the same outcomes without using rare earth elements. For example, some EV motors are now moving to systems that don't use rare earths. We will need to find new ways of separating and processing rare earth elements that are less environmentally harmful. For example, there's some research in Montana on the use of biochar in rare earth element separation and processing. And then finally, for now, we'll need to think about this in terms of circular economies and secondary recovery of rare earths, for example, from coal mine waste, and also of recycling of rare earths. So not just necessarily finding new supplies that are inside the ground and require mining, but also sort of adding these sort of existing sources of supply into our supply chains in ways that can achieve these sort of dual goals of diversification and of environmental sustainability. I'll stop there for now.
Not to put you on the spot, but how would you evaluate 1 to 2 years?
Well, most people think that this will take at least a decade from now, and this is not starting now. This has been going on for several years. So trying to develop a whole separate supply chain in 1 to 2 years is unrealistic. We certainly can go faster than we have been, and there are sort of many elements to that, but it's not going to be solved in the next year or two.
Excellent. I'm going to turn to Seng in a minute about thinking about what diversification means in the places where we're diversifying to, right? But Tiff, did you have any comments right then?
Just a brief comment, which is, as we all know, the Trump administration much prefers bilateral agreements to multilateral. And not everyone in the audience might even know that the reason Xi Jinping and Trump were in South Korea was because there was an Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum on there, grouping 21 nations, much of the world's economy. The reason you might not know about it is because Trump did not attend. He met with Xi Jinping and immediately jumped on a plane and flew back to Washington. Xi Jinping, as he has been doing for years now, showed up, was at the meeting, talked a lot about the importance of multilateralism, met with a lot of different world leaders. And I think that sort of that approach is going to be necessary if the U.S. does want to find a way to diversify. As Andrew was saying, you have to work with other countries to do this. You can't. The U.S. is not going to create its own independent rare earths ecosphere. And I just would say the U.S. is so far, I would say, doing a very bad job of working with other nations. There's been a lot of problems, as we know, with the tariffs earlier this year, not only alienating countries that we might not have always had a great relationship, but some of our closest allies. I'm thinking Mexico and Canada and so on.
Yeah. When we think about diversification, I mean, one of the, particularly with these dirty, dangerous, and difficult kinds of industries like mining, sometimes diversification looks like the export of pollution. Or the export of undesirable industries to third places. Or it can look like that. So Seng, I'd like you to address this question a little bit. So how should we think about these impacts of diversification of critical minerals, not only with, especially outside of China, as countries, including China, are diversifying supply chains. Right? That is what we see happening in Kachin. So if communities in places like Kachin State in Burma or other places are paying these costs, right? How can these risks be managed? How can they be mitigated? And could you maybe tell us a little bit more about what's happening on the ground? Like what does rare earth mining look like on the ground in Kachin?
Thank you, Dr. Kristin, again. And yeah, just like Dr. Andrew also mentioned about rare is actually not rare, right? So you can pretty much find in almost every part of the world. But the most crucial thing is, are you willing to do that? Because of it's involved in a lot of these environmental costs, right? So as Dr. Andrew also mentioned, United States used to be the largest producer in 1950s to 1980s, but all of this they just stopped doing that because of environmental costs. They have to pay a lot, so they stopped doing that. So China take over that. China starting to produce all this rare mineral with all these environmental costs. But now China is also starting to realize with this the environmental cost that they have to pay. So now that's what they're starting to ship their pollutions to the other part of the world as well, just next to its border. Dr. Kristin, if you don't mind, can I pull off my slide again just to see how the rare mining actually look like on the ground, and back to my home country. Yes, thank you. Yeah, actually, those rare mining regions are now completely controlled by the Kachin Independent Organization, but they don't really have this policy at the moment. They said that they have policy, but on ground there's no effective policy implementations and regulatory that govern all this systematic rare mining. So now, yeah, you will see that China policy has an impact. Next, please. Next, please. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah. Okay, that's the mining region. Can you go back again? The previous slides. Yes. Okay. This map. No, the previous one. Yes, please. Thank you. So this is actually on this picture. You will see the left side of the picture. You will see the Chinese border just right next to the Chinese border. That's all the mining site, and this is how the mining site actually look like. There's over like 400 mining site that are operating in just next to this border. Next, please. And yeah, Dr. Andrew also mentioned about the mining process that involved. The mining process is a bit different from in the US and here in practice in Burma. So there's thousands of these hole that dig upon on this on top of the mountain. And after that, they inject this chemical solution and to leach out this red ore. So next, please. And this involved with lots of this environmental cost, right? So they inject this ammonium sulfate and other chemical material that just right into this hole. And yeah, next, please. And so after that, they collected all this chemical containing chemical liquid to this collection pond. After that, they make another leaching again with this chemical component. Next, please. So after that, they discharge all this liquid water, and then they collect that. They collected this sentiment that contained the rare mineral. Next. And next, for the next process, they put it in this giant ground oven, and then they bake it to transform into the rare earth oxide. So this is the last process that they do in Burma. Next. So this is the rare earth oxide that after that they transport right next to across the China border, shifting to the China. Next. Yeah, okay, so you will see that those rare earth mining are all over the place. There's no systematic regulations or that prevent from environmental protections or any protection. So this rare earth mining are just right next to the river, villages, houses, and farm. So imagine that this intensive chemical component that just polluted all over this place. And and all this downstream river, upstream, the downstream river has impact on that. Next, please. So yeah, those are the chemical bags that using for this mining. An average of like 200 tons of chemical bag that they need for just one single mining site. Next. Yeah, so that's environmental impact. It's enormous. Like deforestations and soil pollutions, air pollution, that's all involved with this because of they use this firewood to bake on this this chemical or the oxide, the rare earth oxide. So they need intensive this wood to fuel this oven. Yeah, next. Yeah. So most of these rare earth mining sites are administrator and they're operated by the Chinese technicians, and the local people are just like the daily worker with exposed to the chemical without any protections, gears, and any systematic trainings. Next. Yep. So water pollution is immense. So all the streams, river are just contaminated, and nothing can be found. No living things can be found in this river. And this river are essential to this tributary river for this major river, Irrawaddy River. That's for supporting like millions of people and lives. And it's also this Irrawaddy dolphin, one of the most critical endangered species, are also in this river. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, so there's some of the organizations do the assessment, and the local organization do the assessment, and they found this like there's a multiple chemical toxins that dissolve in this river. Thank you. Next.
Could I? So I'm going to jump in with a question here from that you've just a little bit from, but this is from Mary Callahan. And Mary asks, are the mining companies operating in Kachin State entirely Chinese? Are they subsidized by the Chinese government? And I want to ask a follow-up to that as well. Are these, are the companies state-owned, or are these private companies? And how what is the degree of connection between the state and what's happening on the ground here?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mary Callahan. And also glad to meet you here again. And yeah, it's a very interesting question. And actually, the Chinese government, they always claim that they are not part of this, project, or they always claim that they always tell this company to comply with these environmental regulations. But this Chinese company are not directly, like driven by the government themselves as a policy. But the thing is, this Chinese company on the ground, they all have to have the quota from this 6 rare earth company that state company that monopolize the whole rare earth supply chain, right? Before they go to Burma to do the mining, they have to get the quota. According to that quota, they have to return, and then they have to deposit back to this rare earth company, the major rare earth company, which means they have direct control over this rare earth. And also the chemical bag that they have to import to this mining site, they also need to get permission from this company. That's what they said. And Yeah, and so Chinese company, the Chinese government themselves, they never admit that they are part of this project. But this is how they have been linked to this major state-owned firm that control the whole supply chain, including the export-import or quota setting up to export to the U.S. and the other country. Yeah, that's how the connections that happen. Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to bring up is when we think about the way that this is happening in Kachin, and there's clearly these are huge environmental problems. Some of the health impacts and social impacts, are also really, really intense. And in the United States has already done a lot of diplomatic efforts, as Andrew alluded to, including this initiative called the Mineral Security Partnership, and also other sort of initiatives to try and work with other countries to develop alternative supply chains. And over the last week, I think the United States has signed maybe 4 more memorandums of understanding. So so for Seng, and also I think Andrew, if you can jump in here, how do we try and make sure that this isn't we're not replicating Kachin province or states experience in other diversification efforts?
Should I?
Okay. Yeah. So why don't you go ahead first, and Andrew, then you can jump in.
Okay, that's very interesting. Point about how the U.S. and the Trump administration is approaching to the rest of the world. What I see is right now, even though lots of these Asian countries, particularly Thai, Malaysia, and this country are signing this MOU, it's still very early stage. I would say that it's not really materialized, and I don't think that many of these countries want to be positioned like what we are having right now, especially like just after the Trump trips to the ASEAN summit. Many of these Thai medias and Thai politicians are starting to argue and criticize with this MOU that Thailand, doesn't want to be, the battlefield for the China and the U.S. trade war, especially Thailand. Not just Thailand, the whole Asian region is like kind of relying on the trade partner with the China, major trade partner of the China. So they don't want to be entangled with this kind of trade war as well. And as we also discussed that, this is about who want to bring or who want to host this all the pollution. That's the major question. That even the question is it's U.S. is really also want to bring back this kind of really environmental costly project back to their home. And we also learned that even including the Montana have lots of rare deposit just down to this Battle Road, Sheep Creek regions, and many companies are trying to working on it, but it's a public land, so forest service land, and I don't know, in the U.S. people would like to really accept this, and many companies are trying to advocate that they are trying to develop with this technology that less environmental costs. So, but it will be still really hard to make material and feasible in the near future. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add briefly. Some of this comes down to just the basics of the market. And one reason we go to places where products can be produced cheaply with low labor costs and low environmental standards is that means lower prices for consumers. So it will come down to, is there visibility of these things and tracing of supply chains where a company like, Apple or Audi or so on has some pressure on them to have sustainable supply chains, even if it means costing a little more? Are we going to, pay more for end products through tariffs or through, sustainable supply chains, or are we just going to have a race to the bottom? And that's a lot of what this comes down to. So I'll leave it there since there's so many other questions.
Great, thank you. Let's turn to a question. I'm going to tie this in with thinking about cooperation with countries, maybe in ASEAN or maybe more generally. Karen Adams writes here, it's interesting that Secretary Bessent said the U.S. will focus on cooperating on rare earths with other democracies. Apart from Trump's bilateral proclivities and recent rough treatment of allies, is it realistic to think a supply chain could be constructed from primarily democratic states? And I'll add to that. Tiff, if you can jump in here, like what is the broader trade and cooperation situation looking like with countries being excited about willing to cooperate with the United States vis-a-vis China on this versus trying to hedge versus not willing to cooperate with the United States?
Well, not speaking to rare earths momentarily, but I mean, China, the larger story, I think, in recent years is China has been tremendously successful, and ironically so, as presenting itself as somehow a champion of free trade. And that is ironic because it has as we know, a largely there's a lot of state planning in the economy, and there's all sorts of subsidies that drive its economic growth as well. But I think the Chinese government has been provided a great opportunity as the U.S. has taken actions that frankly have alienated a lot of its key trading partners around the world. And China's been very, very smart about that. I'm not surprised either. Just the example I just mentioned, Xi Jinping stayed on for the APEC meeting in Busan in South Korea. And by all reports, did a very good job of presenting China as a great trading partner to the world. This goes back a long time ago with the U.S. pulling out of the so-called TPP, the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. But I do think, just sort of a larger issue, if we do want to have strong trading relationships with the world, we can't do it on a bilateral basis, which apparently seems to be the proclivity of the Trump administration. China is very much, through organizations, just another one, the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in Southeast Asia. China has been tremendously successful at working closely with countries across the region. China's done this even as it has been seen as throwing its weight around in something of a bully in places like the South China Sea, its disputes on the Indian border. So China is able to actually be, by some reports, sort of a bully in the region, and at the same time have strengthened trading relationships with the world. So I don't have a good answer for you, Kristin, or for our audience, but I do think we're going to have to focus on something beyond this emphasis on bilateral relationships, of course.
Andrew, could you speak a little bit to the approach, at least during the Biden administration, to more plurilateral or multilateral approaches to critical mineral supply chains versus bilateralism?
Sure. I'll just call out a couple examples. Australia and Canada, big mining countries with many types of critical minerals and a long positive relationship with the US, and places where they have had more success in developing social license for mining and associated elements of supply chains. Countries where they have more investment in innovation around things like secondary recovery of minerals. So, there are examples of democracies that we've been working with for many years that we need to build on. Even with that, even though those relationships have been going on for a long time, we've made very little progress in actually altering the broad structure of these supply chains, especially at the midstream and the downstream ends of them.
So we have a number of interesting comments and questions. I think we can take some of this and bring it keep it global and also bring it back home in a way. So we have a comment from Bob Seidenschwartz saying that he's doubtful of decoupling from China until we accept that processing of these minerals require we lead by example here in the US. Exporting environmental challenges has long been policy. And who among allies would be willing to accept this kind of approach, not just by word, but by if we don't have skin in the game. And so when we think about this, and then there's an excellent question as well about mining in the Bitterroot, the Sheep Creek mine. So I'm going to first turn back to you, Sung, and to think about what would you have looked at both in Kachin State and maybe more broadly at community responses to mining? What sorts of lessons would you take from those experiences, or what kinds of governance, community structures do you think would help us as a community, lead by example and show how this could be done?
Oh, thank you. That's a really tough questions. Yeah, and that's definitely interesting. Well, that's what many people have a very skeptical about Americans' domestic productions over this real supply chain, especially pretty much like mountain pass and all the other different regions in US. They can pretty much mine the light rare earth. It's quite a and including the many alliance like Australia has lots of rare earth mining, mostly the light rare earth. But the thing is the heavy rare earth. That's the most critical for the U.S. Defense industry. That right now, until now, the U.S. defense industry have to rely on this the Chinese import, Chinese export. And during the Biden administration, they have the bilateral or the bipartisan legislation that happened to set the date in 2026 to stop buying all this heavy rare earth from the China, particularly for the defense industry. But it seemed not to be happen. So that's why they shifted to the 2027. But even 2027, I don't think that, or many people doesn't really think that that's a feasible really date that the U.S. will able to catch up with this. And so particularly this heavy rare earth, that's come from Burma, and especially this heavy rare earth is very hard to process with this lots of chemical intensity that I just mentioned. So that's why one of the reasons that many countries trying to ship their pollutions to the country that has very low or almost no regulations, and that's the reason that I think so. That's just, how the China is taking the advantage of it. And the community part, even in Burma, like in my community, many people are starting to realize that this is really harmful for the long-term future. But in the past, people in the community doesn't really have this knowledge about the rare earth, what really rare about how much is what and how this take place in a global scenario. So especially the people in this mining region that have no idea about rare earth, they just come, they just see that many people, Chinese company just came and then do all this mining. But lots of these community organization, non-profit organization are trying to educate it to the people. And many of these community who get access to this kind of awareness and training, they're starting to oppose or against this kind of rare earth mining, and that's happening in their part of the country. And so it's lots of challenging, even including the KIA, the administration. They have to rely on this resource extraction for funding the revolutions, and also to fund these public services across this their territory control area. So it's really hard for the KIO also to manage in balance in this between the environmental cost and nation building process. And back to the Bitterroot. I think lots of this in the U.S. also many people have divided opinion, and some people really want to go forward. Let's do that. This is national security, and we have to prioritize the national security, and sacrifice some of this part. So like many organization farms, and like some of you may access with this realexchange.com. That's the website that they openly educated people to accept more of this mining, in order to prioritize the national security issue. So that's also happening within this U.S. Community themselves as well. So like Montana, Missouri, Montana, we all this region also have a lot of this mining legacy, and negative, and both negative and positive, many negative side as well. So it's also bring back this memory again, right? So Montana are trying to shift away from this kind of this extractive industry to more in service industry. But now, are we really ready to bring back this kind of industry again? That's a big question on this community. Thank you.
Thank you. So please do keep adding your questions into the Q&A or the chat. Either one are okay. I'm monitoring both. Tiff, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that, right, we don't have a deal yet, and what we need to look at are concrete outcomes. And I couldn't agree more. And I think there was one indication perhaps of this. I was looking at the readouts of the meeting last week, the Chinese readout and the U.S. side readout, and they're a little bit different, particularly with regard to critical minerals, where the U.S. side said, okay, well, China's going to lift its restrictions, and that's going to include all of the other stuff that's happened in critical minerals over the past year, including restrictions on gallium and germanium, and the earlier rare earth magnet restrictions, et cetera. Export paperwork controls, right? Those that went into place. So what are you going to be like? How should we think about these differences, and what are you going to be looking at to see what sorts of concrete measures? Right, if we're looking for concrete measures, what sorts of concrete measures are we looking for, and how are you going to assess whether this preliminary discussion is approaching a real deal, or is just another set of words?
Yeah, well, Kristin, I think you bring up a good point. I've been struggling to figure out what happened to the China's rare earth export critical mineral restrictions of December last year, and then their export licensing regime they put on critical minerals in April. And to read the White House fact sheet, which I have before me, they say that China is going to issue general licenses valid for exports of rare earths, gallium, germanium, antimony, and graphite. And the general license means, quote, the de facto removal of controls China imposed in April 2025 and October 22. So yes, if you read the Chinese side, I think it says something very different. I think the White House's use of the word de facto, it tells us something. It means China didn't say they were actually necessarily going to do that. China, even when there was earlier progress on rare earths in the spring, for example, China was able to slow walk the approvals of exports of rare earths, and this created enormous havoc just one example, for American automakers. And from everything I do, I sort of, my sense of China, I don't think they're going to end that piece of leverage that they have over the U.S. I think in their eyes, they see some sort of balance. They see the U.S.'s ability to exert leverage, particularly in advanced technology and particularly in advanced semiconductors, as the U.S.'s point of strength and theirs as rare earths. As you know better than me, Kristin, they started years ago putting restrictions on exports of rare earths to Japan. I was living in China at the time, and the question we business journalists kept asking was, when will they do this to the U.S.? because clearly they have the ability and it's growing stronger and stronger to do it. Well, they went ahead and did it, obviously, and I don't think there's any reason to assume they won't do it again. I'm quite certain that they will. They haven't gotten what they want. There's many things they still want. They got a little bit of potentially at least short-term bad news when we heard that Trump was not going to allow NVIDIA to export I think it's called Blackwell, its most advanced AI chip. And there had been talk before the meeting in South Korea that might be something that the US would offer to China. So they'll keep pressing on that as well. So I would expect to see in the coming months, and of course we do have this April visit by Trump planned to Beijing, and I think that'll happen, and then a reciprocal offer or invitation to Xi Jinping to visit the US after that. I think in the months to that, both sides are going to try to make this work. I do anticipate both sides doing things that upset each other, particularly in the rare earths area, also in the advanced semiconductor area, which will make tensions flare again. So I'm just watching that. Just back to your one piece of your question, what am I watching? One would be China actually calling this anything other than a consensus. A consensus for China is so far from a deal. Earlier this year they talked about a consensus on a framework for a deal. They like to say several layers of qualifications to actually getting to a deal. And the U.S. may be calling this a deal. I don't know. It's not a deal. China has not agreed to a deal. And as I said, one last thing, the Chinese ambassador to the U.S. today, in published comments that he gave to a speech to the U.S.-China Business Council a few days ago, but it was published today, says that basically lays out the frictions between the two countries, the 4 red lines, as he put it, and says both sides need to take concrete steps to actually ensure that the consensus that was reached is not risked. So as long as we're hearing statements like that from China, I think we still have a long ways to go before we get to a real deal.
That makes a lot of sense. I wanted to follow up a little bit about semiconductors, and maybe you can explain a little bit to the audience about export licensing procedures, which is in trade politics and international politics actually far more interesting than it sounds. But I think that in some ways there's that it's in some ways reciprocal what is happening with semiconductors and rare earths in the U.S.-China relationship, and maybe you agree and maybe you don't. But how is that working? Like, what does that mean for U.S.-China business and companies that are trying to, continue on and do manufacturing and industry? How is trade actually working on the ground?
Well, to your last question, I mean, for a company like NVIDIA, this has been devastating. Their inability to sell into the China market, which is the most important market in the world probably now for these advanced semiconductors. The restrictions on that has been devastating. Earlier this year, the Trump administration announced a very unusual agreement where NVIDIA was allowed to sell an older technology, the H20 AI chip. And the U.S. government then would take royalties on the purchases on the sales, rather, that NVIDIA made to China, which is very odd, unprecedented. How did China respond? They ordered their companies to not buy the H20. They said it was old technology. They said there was potentially a back door that would allow the U.S. government to spy on them. They called in NVIDIA in China and berated them for potentially putting a back door into this, which NVIDIA, of course, denied. So U.S. companies, I think, are in a very, very difficult situation. They're sort of a pawn in this larger trade relationship. And just one other thing I would say, the U.S. restrictions on advanced semiconductors goes way back. It was, I guess one thing I said, after the first Trump administration, there was an expectation, certainly on the Chinese side, that former President Biden would back off on some of the trade restrictions, including semiconductors. And he very much did not do that, as you well know, and actually very much tightened controls, and particularly in the advanced semiconductor area. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, came up with the formulation, a small yard and a high fence, to describe how the US would control China's access to semiconductors. Small meaning only a small group of the most advanced semiconductors will not be available to China, and there'll be very, very large barriers to China getting access. But that became a much larger yard as the US continued to expand these restrictions. This is something China has had and has been very concerned about for a very long time. And I think you're absolutely right that they see a parallel with the with the restrictions on rare earths. I do not expect them to make significant any sort of significant compromises on rare earths unless they get something on advanced semiconductors. And they say that privately as well.
There have been a lot of really interesting questions and some good back and forth in the chat and the Q&A about some of the the more technical aspects, in particular relating to environmental regulations and things like this. So Andrew, as we sort of approach the end of our time, how do you recommend that we think about rare earth mining, but perhaps critical mineral mining and processing in the United States more broadly in the long term? Like what sorts of skills should we be thinking about focusing on? What sorts of maybe areas of concern do you have when you look at the broader US industrial ecosystem in this area?
Yeah, thanks, Kristin. I think I would say, big picture, I would like us to be sort of taking a more systems approach to these problems. And that's kind of a vague term, but we could apply it in a lot of ways. Right now, when we are evaluating environmental impacts of a project, we do it on a project by project basis, which is appropriate in many respects. But it fails to account for the comparison of doing something to get, say, rare earths in a much more environmentally damaging way in a place like Myanmar compared to doing it in a more environmentally friendly way in a place like the US. So we don't have that capacity to sort of make those comparisons. Thinking about where we want to go and where we want to end up. Sometimes we hear sort of criticism of renewables and EV batteries because of the mineral requirements and the environmental costs of those. But again, if you are taking a systems analysis and doing a life cycle assessment, comparing those impacts to our current energy system, there is no comparison in terms of global long-term effects of fossil fuel-based energy system versus one that is reliant on more minerals for clean energy and clean technology. So I guess that since we're nearing the end, I would just appeal to sort of trying to sort of think about these things in a bigger picture systems analysis way, whether that's thinking globally, thinking long-term, and tying this to the issue of both climate change and improving human livelihoods. So thanks.
Thanks. And I think that's a wonderful comment to have near the end when we are doing this through the Mansfield Center, which I think does have this wonderful forum to be able to think about local problems in global frameworks and to bring the world to Montana, Montana to the world. So just in our final minutes, I'd like to ask each of our panelists here to just say what you will be looking at with regard to these issues in the weeks, months, and maybe years to come. So maybe we'll go in the same order. No, we'll go in reverse order that we originally spoke. So Sug, why don't you start us off?
Well, sorry. That's a really tough question. What's gonna be in the next few more years to come? And I think many countries are getting alarmed by these critical minerals, and particularly the rare earth, especially like the industrialized country. Japan has been, experienced with this trade war, using this rare earth as a political tools. So that's why they got a agreement. They signed agreement with this Trump administration during the previous visit. So I think Japan's and Americans and most of these industrialized country, they're trying to get away from this dependency on this Chinese rare earth export. But many of these innovations are also going on, and also different options are also seeking. Like the Trump administration also really looking for the seabed mining. That's obviously lots of this environmental issue as well involved, but that's exploration stage. It's also going on. So and many of these Chinese also know that, Chinese also know that, aware of that. Many people are really rushing toward the alternative solutions, or the substituting the dependency on the China export. So they're trying to. That's why this trick talk between the Trump's and President Trump and Xi Jinping is very interesting. 1 year period, who will go which direction? So what I believe is Chinese will go further innovative with this chip industry, to get more leverage over this by using this rare earth, and so that they can reduce reliance on the American chip import as well. And on the other hand, at the same time, the American will also pushing toward more with this diversifying the rare earth. And then after a year, I think they will see what leverage that they will have. And what also the contradicting issue, contrast issue is, the China, it's getting more strengthened with these environmental regulations, and on the other side, the American is getting more deregulating all this, environmental regulations to expand more the domestic production. That's a very, revised position that I would say that, yeah. So at least 1 or 2 years ahead, within this few years, I think this American will be still, especially heavy rare earth. For the heavy rare earth, they will still rely on this Chinese import. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Nope, sorry, Tiff.
So I guess I'm looking for a little more consistency in the U.S. approach towards China. I think there's obvious, enormous differences between the two countries, and we could expect Beijing and Washington to keep butting heads again and again. There's areas where we do need to protect the advantage we have, whether it's advanced semiconductors or elsewhere. On the other hand, both countries and the companies of both countries, and frankly, the economies and we, the people in both countries, will be greatly diminished if there isn't some sort of a path forward figured out. So as I like to point out, if it's fine if we wanted to decouple from China, but we would have to, first of all, accept the fact that our big multinationals would be greatly diminished and less relevant globally, and that American consumers would pay much higher prices for many of our goods. So I guess I see a relationship where the two sides are continually checking each other to make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, but they do need to find a way going forward. I think Andrew also made an interesting point earlier, which is perhaps there's a way for us to, there should be a way where we also, we don't reinvent the wheel on rare earths and critical minerals. China has built up this tremendous capacity on processing and mining. And yes, we need to diversify, but yes, we need to figure out how we can continue to rely on China, smartly rely on China for rare earths and critical minerals as well. I'll just stop there.
All right, maybe not a direct answer to your question, but given that I'm a professor, I want to just as my last word, put in a plug for research and education, and recognizing that those are going to be essential to solving this and really any other problem. That includes, welcoming students and collaborators from around the globe. It includes training future engineers, metallurgists, miners, social scientists to work with communities, political scientists, and so on. And it's going to be hard to solve this problem if we continue to move in the opposite direction of that.
Hear, hear. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. And as we close up, I'll just highlight a couple of Mansfield Center events that are coming up. On November 9th, we'll honor the Mansfield Military Legacies as Veterans Day from 9 to 10 a.m. with a conversation on KGVO radio with Gary Shelton, Commandant of the Private Mike Detachment of the Marine Corps League in Anaconda. And as part of our support of the Model United Nations, Model UN, hosting more than 350 Montana and Idaho high school students, we will live stream their keynote speaker, journalist Jason Bellini of Scripps News, on Frontlines and Deadlines, a correspondence guide to finding and telling the world's toughest stories. Check the Mansfield Center website next week to register for this event, which is on November 24th from 9 to 10 a.m. And thank you again, everybody, for coming. And I hope you all have fabulous days.